Now, named after the band members, each wrote down a random word on a card and then rearranged these into something that sounded half reasonable. Today I'm diving into Barclay James Harvest. Those secret architects whose forgotten masterpieces are more relevant than ever in September 2025. Now, from their symphonic rock beginnings back in 1970 to their reflective swan song in 1997, I'll give every album an equal share of attention. There's no favourites, just a fair look at how the band evolved over nearly 3 decades. Their self-titled debut album from 1970 kicks things off, and it was an ambitious start which blended rock and full orchestral backing with Robert John Godfrey at the helm. Tracks like Dark Now My Sky quickly became a fan favourite and a defining track for the band's early years. The album is full of lush Mellotron textures and melodic guitar lines from John Lees. It has to be said, though, that at times the orchestra perhaps overpowered the band, but it really helped to add a grand cinematic feel to that overall idea that they were trying to portray. Songs like Taking Some Time On hint at their potential for melodic, emotional songwriting. It's fair to say it wasn't a commercial success, but it did mark them as a band to watch. It was uneven, but really fascinating and a real statement of intent. The album set the stage for really everything that followed. Now, often regarded as their first classic, the album, once again from 1971, took everything from that debut album and made it more cohesive this time. The track Mockingbird debuts here, and it's arguably in its definitive form. The orchestra is still present, but with much better integration this time with the band's overall sound. Galadriel, which featured John Lennon's Epiphone Cassina guitar, really is a gorgeous highlight. Lyrically, the album chooses to explore love, loss and introspection with maturity that was beyond their years. The band had begun to sound really much more confident and emotionally engaged throughout all of this. The album's reputation has really only grown, appearing now in many lists of top rock albums over the years. It's a perfect entry point for anyone new to Barclay James Harvest. Now, their third album, Barclay James Harvest and Other Short Stories, also from 1971, is more varied, with each track feeling really like its own little tale. The orchestral touch remains, but it's really much less dominant this time around and far more subtle. The songs are quite introspective and sometimes really quite whimsical, with a much lighter overall tone to them. The band's songwriting had by this album really become a lot more diverse and adventurous. The production also felt tighter and much more balanced than before. On reflection, it was not as celebrated as Once Again, but it still had a real charm to it, quite a following. Now, listeners who enjoy Barclay James Harvest's pastoral, reflective side will really find a lot to love in this LP, and it's a bridge between their symphonic beginnings and their coming shift in sounds. Now, in 1972, they released an album called Baby James Harvest, and this marked their last album for the Harvest record label, and was the first really without a full orchestra. The band handled the productions themselves this time around, and it gave a much more personal touch to the finished product. There's a track called Summer Soldier, and this is a real standout. It's combining anti-war lyrics with quite an evocative melody. I really like that one. And the Wooly Woolston home track Moonwater closes the album in a dreamy atmospheric way. It felt warmer, but it was quieter and more intimate than its predecessors. Whilst again, it was not a huge seller, it still resonated very well with the dedicated fans that the band had begun to collect. And it's one of those albums that really rewards close listening and patience. This was the closing chapter on their early symphonic phase. Now, their Polydor debut stripped away the orchestra entirely for a much cleaner rock production. The album Everyone Is Everyone Else, their debut with Polydor in 1974, was produced by Roger Bain, and it had a rawer edge compared to those earlier albums. The tracks Child of the Universe and For No One really became fan favourites, and also radio staples, which was really important. Lyrically, it dealt with alienation, identity, and hope. The songs were tight, and they were melodically strong with fewer progressive detours. However, it became a cult hit thanks to mainly a heavy Radio Caroline airplay. The album opened up Barclay James Harvest to a much wider audience, especially in the UK, and it's often been regarded as one of their most consistent works. Recorded in San Francisco, Time-Honored Ghosts album from 1974 had a warm West Coast feel to it. Produced this time by Elliot Mazer, he gave it a real polished, spacious sound. Jonathan is a song inspired by Jonathan Livingstone's Seagull, and it really adds a literary touch, whilst Titles cleverly weave Beatles references into its lyrics. Musically, it is quite gentle, but it's confident, and there are strong melodic hooks. It's a cohesive, atmospheric album that was just perfect for a quiet evening listen, and helped cement their reputation as thoughtful songwriters, with fans often ranking this as one of their mid-70s highlights. Now, the self-produced release Octoberon from 1976 had a much more introspective and dreamlike quality to it, and it really showed a band that was now willing to experiment within its established sound that they now had, the style that had given them their success up to this point. The track Rock and Roll Star exposed them to a moment of mainstream exposure on Top of the Pops. The lyrics were personal and often nostalgic, reflecting on fame and identity. Musically, it's lush, but it's not overly bombastic. Many critics were mixed with their opinions at the time, but really fans have come to really appreciate it as the years have passed. The album grows on you with repeated listens, revealing a real hidden depth to it. It's subtle and an underrated entry in their catalogue. Now, in 1977, Gone to Earth is one of the band's most commercially successful albums, especially so in Germany. The track Hymn was the standout from the album and perhaps one of their best-known songs of all time. The aptly named Poor Man's Moody Blues playfully echoed Nights in White Satin, and the album was as a whole full of polished, melodic and emotionally rich material, and with its iconic die-cut sleeve and owl artwork, it made it a highly sought-after collector's favourite, and still is, by the way. The sound on this one is really refined and confident. It's showing a band probably at its peak at this point. It was their breakthrough to a much wider European audience and an impressive high point in both sales and artistry. And the next studio release lent into a slightly poppier, more concise sound. Berlin from 1978 are some real highlights from this one, and it was characterised by the use of Roman numerals on it. There's a defined balance between those light-hearted tracks and the more serious themes. The production was smooth and accessible, and it really appealed to a very broad audience indeed. It's a very consistent album with no real weak spots to it. As I say, the record performed particularly well in Germany and cemented their popularity there, capturing a band in a transitional phase, but still brimming with creativity. Fans often hold this one in high regard, and quite rightly so. Marking a new chapter for the remaining members of the Universe, and this was their first album without Wally Wolston, to be replaced with a more modern keyboard approach. Love on the Line and Capricorn were the standout tracks from this one, and with strong melodies on each of them. This time, the sound leaned towards a radio-friendly rock audience, but retained Barclay James Harvest's heart. Some fans missed the symphonic feel, but it did gain them new listeners, that's for sure. The production felt very much of its time. It was sleek, and it was bright, and it was a solid commercial success, especially in Europe, and a key album in helping them to refine their 1980s direction. And was upbeat and optimistic in its tones. So it was that the track Life is for Living became really a major hit and a concert favourite. This album focused on melody and accessibility, perhaps over complexity this time around, and it was noticeable that it was lighter and perhaps more pop-orientated than their earlier works. That being said, the critical receptions again were mixed, but the audiences themselves embraced its positive energy. Now, the production, although crisp and very 1981 in feel, it did capture the band at their most radio-friendly. It was an all-round feel-good entry into their catalogue. With the release of Ring of Changes in 1983, the band began to really embrace the synth-heavy production techniques of the early 1980s. The title track is epic and an emotionally powerful and definite late-career highlight. Other songs on the album balance social commentary with personal reflection, and whilst the album was glossy, it still recognisably felt like a Barclay James Harvest album, but really demonstrated how they were adapting their sound to the new musical landscape. Commercially, it kept them very strong in Europe, but some fans saw it as their last truly great album. I'll leave you to make your own minds on that. It is an underrated record, in my opinion, and one that deserves more attention. Now, in 1984, the band released Victims of Circumstance, and this saw them take that theme of 80s polish and really move it further than ever before. The title track had a sharp political edge to it, which was unusual for the band. So the song Rebel Woman, in particular, as well as some of the other tracks, had an urgent, punchy feel to them. So with that big and shiny production, it divided many of the fans, some loving it and others definitely not liking it. And whilst it is a diversive record, it showed the bands were comfortable taking some musical risks. And even though the melodies are still there, they remained evident even under all those synth layers and represented Barclay James Harvest, their most commercial sounding. It became a fascinating, if sometimes polarising part of their story. Now, the band continued their slick keyboard-driven sound with the 1987 release of Face to Face. Songs like Prisoner of Your Love and Alone in the Night are really very strong tracks, and it saw the lyrics explore more personal and social themes with some sincerity to them. Production again is that pure mid-80s, with those big drums and smooth mixes that so characterised the era. Whilst it's certainly not groundbreaking, it was a solid set of songs and proved that they could still deliver quality this late in the decade. Fans of their 80s work will find much to enjoy as it is one of their more consistent late period efforts. Now come to Welcome to the Show from 1990, and this really felt like a creative reset after that 1980s era of songs. John Lennon's guitar is a heartfelt tribute and a standout moment on this one. The track was upbeat and catchy. It showed that renewed energy the band had discovered. They sounded inspired and engaged once again, making it a strong late-career album that surprised many of their fans that had perhaps given up the project. The songwriting felt honest and confident, and it was a great reintroduction to Barclay James Harvest if you'd skipped through their 1980s work. Hopefully you didn't. Now, their 1993 release, Caught in the Light, was a more introspective and atmospheric record, where the band had really slowed things down and focused on mood and melody above all other things. Songs like Cold War showed more thoughtful and mature writing, with the album feeling like a cohesive journey rather than a singles collection. It is often overlooked by fans, which is a shame, as it does contain some real hidden gems. The production this time was somewhat understated, letting the lyrics take centre stage, but its redeeming feature is that it rewards careful, repeated listening. Many fans have argued that it is their last truly classic album. I don't know. You can tell me in the comments below. So, after a gap of 4 years, they released their final studio album, River of Dreams, in 1997, bringing their career full circle. It was polished again and melodic, and with a dominant nostalgic undertone to it. The song's Yesterday's Heroes is a real reflective piece of music, almost a farewell in itself. They sounded relaxed, as though at peace with closing this particular chapter. It's certainly not flashy, but it is really heartfelt and dignified, and the production, again smooth and professional, it gave the whole proceedings really a graceful finish to it. It may not be their most adventurous work by a long shot, but it's a fitting end, a quiet but meaningful goodbye to their fans. And that's every Barclay James Harvest studio album, all in one video. How about that for you? Their journey from lush orchestral prog to reflective late 90s balladry is a fascinating one. Each era had its gems, and whether you loved the Mellotron heavy early days or the sleek 80s pop years, there really is something in there for all tastes. Now, if you haven't heard some of the later albums, they're well worth exploring in my opinion. Let me know in the comments which Barclay James Harvest album is your personal favourite. Thanks for sticking around for this full studio discography deep dive. I've really enjoyed doing this one. Now, I shot a video listing 10 of my favourite Barclay James Harvest songs, which was a lot of fun to make, and that's the video I want you to watch next. I'll see you over there for that one.